There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a very short review of an amazing collection of linked short stories that's such a beautiful work of literature that I am virtually speechless. That is Rebecca Brown's The Gifts of the Bodies, originally published in 1994. I believe it won the Lambda Award for something or other that year. My history with this book is that I attended a AIDS and Literature conference in the late 1990s, so just a few years after this came out, at which Rebecca Brown was present. And I bought a copy and brought like 2 suitcases full of autographed books, Larry Kramer, Edmund White, and Rebecca Brown, back from that conference at the Key West Literary Seminar, and I never read it. And then I, years later, liquidated my library so I could move to Japan, which is where I live now, and then I quote-unquote, met Greg of Supposedly Fun, whose channel you must know about. If you don't, I'll put a link in the show notes, who counts this among his favorite books of all time. I think it was his top read of last year. I think he's done a full review. If I will link to that. Certainly he brought it back onto my radar and I got a copy, and now I have finally read it. And I sent Greg a humorous message after I finished the first story and said, I'm kind of mad at you. You almost made me cry on the train. The stories are very loosely linked. You could think of it as a novel. Each story also would have a standalone quality. They all involve the unnamed protagonist, who is, I presume, a woman, although I don't know that that's ever stated either. But I assumed that this is based on Rebecca Brown's autobiographical experience of having been a home care worker for people with AIDS, and this was at a time when AIDS was an automatic death sentence, helping people with AIDS stay in their homes as long as was possible, and then often helping them with the transition into hospice care. That does not sound like a light read, and it is not a light read in the sense that it's really emotionally powerful. The main thing that I want to convey to you is that this is completely, utterly unsentimental. There is not one sentimental word, and I almost wept by the end of the first story, and that happened with almost every story after that. And now that I've thought about it for a couple of weeks since I finished the book, and kind of flipped through, revisited some of the stories just by turning the pages and reading a sentence here and a sentence there, I think it's her deceptively simple style. Very short sentences, lots of repetition, simple language, and kind of a matter-of-fact tone as she describes to us what she does physically in caring for these people. Many of the people that she works with are gay men, but not all. There is an elderly woman that's one of her people that she works with, that she helps, and we meet most of the characters in more than one story, not all. There is a powerful mundanity to what Rebecca Brown describes that she does, and each story is titled The Gift of Blah. So the first one, and I will read you the opening from that in a minute, is The Gift of Sweat, The Gift of Mobility, The Gift of Hunger, and so on. And I just dare you to try to read one of these and not be moved. And again, if you are worried about it being sentimental, these stories are anything but sentimental, and that is their power. I was quite surprised to find just now that there are some reviews of this book that talk about how the narrator, the unnamed narrator, seemed uncaring, because we rarely saw her emotions, and that just blows me away, because the book is powerful because of this understated, very mundane way of describing. But it was obvious to me from the first story how much she cared about the people that she was helping, and that came through in what she did. And we also see her, now I should also say, I don't want to make this big personal story, but I did this kind of work, not paid, but as a volunteer in Canada when I was in my early to mid early 20s for maybe off and on for about 5 or 10 years. I can't remember how long. So I also related to it. And yes, I did put off for many years, more than 20 years, I put off reading this book. The only way I can express how mad I am at Greg is that when I finally meet him in person, I'm going to give him a big hug for bringing this back onto my radar, because I was avoiding it. And it did bring everything back. So in conclusion, we really do get to know the narrator as she works with several different people, and as we see her talking to the people at the AIDS volunteer organization, and we start to see how this kind of beautiful, important work that she's doing is taking a toll on her. And I remember that, and it's, again, very subtly and beautifully expressed. It's important work, and unless you have superpowers, you can't do it for too long without needing a break. To give you an idea of that gorgeous mundanity, I'm going to read you the opening page of the first story, The Gift of Sweat. And the only thing that I will say to set up in context, which you wouldn't have known until you get a little bit further into the story, is that the man that she is helping here, her client, Rick, is quite ill. He is quite ill with AIDS. First page in a bit. I went to Rick's every Tuesday and Thursday morning. I usually called before I went to see if he wanted me to pick up anything for him on the way. He never used to ask me for anything until once when I hadn't had breakfast and I stopped at this place a couple blocks from him, the hostess with the mostest, to get a cinnamon roll, and I got 2, one for him. I didn't really think he'd eat it because he was so organic. He had this incredible garden on the side of the apartment with tomatoes and zucchinis and carrots, and he used to do all his own baking. I also got 2 large coffees with milk. I could have eaten it all if he didn't want his. But when I got to his place and asked him if he'd had breakfast and showed him what I'd bought, he squealed. He said those cinnamon rolls were his absolute favorite things in the world, and he used to go to the hostess on Sunday mornings. He said he'd try to be there when they were fresh out of the oven and get the best ones, the ones from the center of the pan, which are the stickiest and softest. It was something he used to do for himself on Sunday, which was not his favorite day. So after that, when I called him before I went over and asked if he wanted anything, he'd still say no thanks, and then I would say, how about the usual, meaning the rolls and the coffee, and he'd say he'd love it. So one morning when I called and asked him if he wanted the usual, and he said he didn't, I was surprised. He said, "Not today." He sounded really chirpy. "Just get your sweet self over here. I got a surprise for you." So the story goes from there, and if that sounds good, and you're prepared to be emotionally devastated in a really beautiful, life-changing way, do check out The Gifts of the Body. Thanks for watching.